Hey guys, it's Olivia here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you the first part of my November wrap-up. Part 1, you ask? Well, the fact of the matter is that in the month of November I read 30 books. Yeah, I'm kind of shocked as well. I did the A to Z readathon where you needed to read a book for every single letter of the alphabet, which is 26 books, and then for the mythathon there were 25 prompts, so it was a lot of reading. It was very intense, and I also had to do some reading for uni, so that's how I ended up at 30, which is a book a day. I read 9,200 pages, that's about 306 pages per book. I am shook to my core, but let's get down to it because I want to talk about 15 of these books with you today, and then 15 of these books in my next video. Let's get to the books. Okay, so I thought we could do this like going through the alphabet, so I'll do A to O in this video, and then the next video I'll do P to Z, plus the extra books that I read, so in no particular order. A is for The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Now this is the whole Sherlock Holmes collection bind up, but I read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and that fit for the Apollo prompt for mythology for the mythathon, which is to read a book of short story collections. It's, as it says in the title, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and I actually really enjoyed this one. That was the first one I had to read for uni. I loved getting to read Sherlock Holmes and Watson and actually just read the actual mysteries. I thought the deductions were done very nicely, and it was just a lot of fun to read that book. Then for B, I read Blood's Game by Angus Donald, and that fit for the prompt of Dinius to read a book that was released in 2018, and this was a review copy, so thank you to Bonner Zafir for sending that one to me to read. That one's a historical fiction which is set in 1800s England, and you follow the Blood family, particularly the son who has a mild case of Asperger's syndrome, and then also sometimes his father. And his father is a criminal, and his son is just trying to do the best he can with what he's given. They come from a very poor family, and they get caught up in a political game that has to do with the king, that has to do with the king being broke, and a lot of his underdogs. It's so fun. It was one of my 5-star reads for this month, and I just loved the main character who has the mild Asperger's syndrome, because those people did exist in history and they had, you know, those kind of lives, and it was very difficult for them because everybody saw them as odd, as they couldn't have an official diagnosis back then. But he was just so sweet, and so he just wanted the best in people. He was so innocent when he went into this book, but so much happens, and the suspense at the end was just getting to me. It was a wild ride. I recommend it if you like political games, if you like criminals, grey area characters where nobody's good or bad, and you just love to be along for a wild ride. Then for C in the A to Z readathon, I read The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, which was another short story collection, and it didn't fit a prompt for mythathon, and I absolutely didn't enjoy it because by that point that was the third Sherlock Holmes one I was reading for uni, and it just got very repetitive. Like the short stories, once you've read enough of them, there are about 10 or 12 in a collection, you start to see the formula, and it kind of takes away your enjoyment, because not because you can figure it out, but you just know exactly what to expect, and because I had to read them back to back for uni, it was just a bit repetitive and my enjoyment was completely gone. Also, there was one short story that was very racist, and I just don't enjoy Arthur Conan Doyle's descriptions of anyone who's a non-white male able-bodied character, because the way he describes other people, it sometimes is really just horrifying and disgusting. For the D prompt of the A to Z readathon and for the Homer prompt of the mythathon where you read a retelling, I read The Dead Fathers Club by Matt Haig. I've been waiting to read a Matt Haig book for so long, and this was another 5-star read, and I absolutely loved it. This one is a retelling of Hamlet, which is a Shakespeare play I also love, and it follows this 13 or 14-year-old boy, I can't remember, whose father has recently died, and he's the only one who can see his father's ghost, who's telling him to kill his new stepfather, who is trying to make a move on his mum. But nobody else can see the ghost, and the question is of whether this guy is seeing things and he's got a mental illness and it's grief, or if he truly is seeing the ghost of his father and he does need to kill his stepfather. Also, it's quite a big deal for a 14-year-old to be contemplating killing someone. The format in this book is so unique. Like, Matt Haig really plays around with the format, and I absolutely love that because it makes it just even more fun to read, and I was so hooked because even though it's following the story of Hamlet, it does its own unique take on things, especially the Ophelia storyline, and also he just adds in these really good nuances, good references to the original. It was just so well written and so well done. I couldn't give it anything less than 5 stars. Then for E in the A to Z readathon, and also for the Athena prompt where you had to read a book that's not the first in the series, I read Exile for Dreamers by Kathleen Baldwin. This is the second book in the School for Unusual Girls series, and I'll tell you about the first one and not this one because, you know, spoilers. So the first one is set in 1814 England. It's historical fiction, and it's about this girl called Georgie who really is into science, but of course her family just want her to, you know, pour tea and do what girls are supposed to do at that time. But she is determined to practice her science, and she accidentally sends the barn of her house on fire. Her parents are outraged and send her to this school where girls are supposed to go and get very disciplined and come back out as these mind-washed ladies. However, when Georgie ends up at that school, she realises it's not all that it seems, and it's not actually a school for torture, but it's a school for unusual girls to do some very unusual things. I absolutely loved the first book, and this one was no different. Just like the first one, you do get alternate historical fiction, but you also get a very, very sweet romance. You get feminist girls in historical England, and you also get fighting against Napoleon, a war strategies, girls kicking butt, but then also, you know, girls being girls, having friendships, and pouring tea. It was such a fun read. For F in the A to Z readathon, I read Finding Aubrey by Sophie Kinsella, and I just cannot believe that I didn't read a Sophie Kinsella book until now. It was so much fun. So this one follows Audrey, and she has a severe case of social anxiety and depression where she doesn't ever leave her house, and she always wears these sunglasses because she doesn't like to make eye contact with anyone. However, when her brother starts to bring around this friend called Linnaeus, I believe, they start to talk a little bit, and they talk by passing notes because she doesn't want to talk to people, and things just go from there. It's not a romantic recovery story. She doesn't fall in love and recover, if that's what you're worried about. It is so funny. Kinsella just inserts so much humour. Felix, the toddler in this one, cracked me up so much, and I love kids, so it was just so nice to see him. There was a great family dynamic. There's a mum, dad, brothers, her, all there, and they're all working together and also fighting, and it's just a very realistic family dynamic. Not entirely dysfunctional, but just family being a family, and it was a really cute romance. It's lacking a bit of that depth, you know, when it goes really deep into things, but it was just a whole lot of fun, and that's what I was expecting. You've also got good medicine taking rep and good psychiatrist rep, because sometimes, you know, people are always unwilling to get help and unwilling to take medicine, and that sometimes promotes a very bad idea. I see that quite a lot in mental health books, so it was nice to see a bit of a difference with this one. For the G prompt, I read The Golem's Eye by Jonathan Stroud, and this also fit for Mythathon Echidna, where you needed to have monsters in your book, and since this one has djinn and demons, it was perfect. This is the second book in the Amulet of Samarkand trilogy by Jonathan Stroud, and it's basically, I'll talk about the first book once again, it's basically about this boy Nathaniel who is 14, I believe, and he lives in this London where magic is a thing, and magic is practiced especially by summoning demons or djinn and making them do your will, and you have to follow these rules and all that. But I think an amulet is stolen, and he wants to make a name for himself as a wizard practicing magic, so he needs to find this amulet and solve this problem going on. I'm trying to remember the first book, and he summons this very funny and humorous djinn called Bartimaeus, and they kind of have a love-hate friendship going on. It's really hilarious, and the author uses footnotes to just add humour to the book. I just find it so funny. It made me laugh out loud so many times. This one, I did enjoy it a little bit less than the first one. It was a lot more slow-paced, maybe because it's bigger, and they add in a second point of view, because before it was Nathaniel and Bartimaeus switching off, but now it's Nathaniel, Bartimaeus and Kitty, and sometimes one storyline was more interesting than the other, so it was a bit slow-paced, but it was still very funny, and it still had me laughing, so I still really enjoyed it. I'm going to mention a Shakespeare one. It's from this collection, but I'm not going to lift up this collection because it's heavy. I'll just mention, like, have an ebook version up there. So the first one that I read, for H, I read Henry IV Part 1, and it was for the free choice part of Mythathon, and I just had to read it for uni. I found it very dry and boring. I think this is the only historical play of Shakespeare's I've read, but I don't think I'm going to be a huge fan of them. It just mostly consisted of fighting, a little bit of politics, but mostly just fighting and people not agreeing with the king and then choosing to fight the king, and yeah, it was quite boring and dry, and that's all I have to say about it. Then for that A to Z readathon, I read Ignite Me by Tahira Murphy, and this also fit the Aries prompt for the mythathon, which is to read a book with an interesting antagonist. You know, there's Warner, there's his storyline, so I chose this one. Guys, if you've seen my rant review of Shatter Me, you know I wasn't the biggest fan of the series from the beginning, and I've kind of pushed my way through it because I need to for my explicit scenes videos. This final one was an absolute joke, guys. It was an absolute joke. I don't know how this could be an ending to a trilogy. I read 350 pages of first I read 100 pages of pure exposition. Then I read 250 pages of love triangle shenanigans and drama when a rebellion is supposed to be going on. And then we had 50 pages of a rebellion that was resolved way too quickly. It was just ridiculous that this was the last book in a trilogy. I couldn't. It was so bad, guys. Don't read Shatter Me. Just don't bother if you haven't already. Okay, then moving on. For J, I read The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. It's a classic, and this fit the prompt in Mythathon for Demeter to read a book with a nature word in the title, which is jungle. And I went into this one thinking that I was just going to get Mowgli and Mowgli's story, but it's not actually that. It's a short story collection, and also poetry is in there too, of jungle stories. So the first one is Mowgli, but then you've also got different animals and they're having their own stories, and it was just interesting to see. I thought the poetry was done really well. There was one moment of racism. I wasn't surprised because I knew that Rudyard Kipling was a racist, and I was actually prepared for more than there was in there. It was a nice read, very quick. I read it in like 2 or 1 hour. Then for K, I read Kid by Simon Armitage, and this fit for the Persephone prompt of reading a book less than 200 pages. This is a poetry collection, and I really enjoyed this one, my other 5-star read. So at first I found this a bit difficult to get into because the poetry was quite conversationalist and casual, which is not my type of poetry, but then it started to grow on me, and I think it's worth giving it a shot. And as well as that, he has this persona called Robinson who flies through a couple of the poems. Like, he's not in every single poem, but he's in enough poems for you to add up a story about Robinson, which I thought was very creatively and well done. And the way that he placed the poems, it was just mind-blowingly well done. And I've never seen this done in a poetry collection before, so I was very happy, and this edition is truly beautiful. Then for L, we have Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and this one also fit the prompt for ancient Greece, just to read a book set in the past, seeing as this is set at a time it was written in 19th century England. So this one is about Lady Audley who has a secret, and it's a crime fiction novel, and basically it was really well done. I was so shocked. Like, it wasn't a plot twist kind of shock, it was a very slow reveal that was just suspenseful, well done, and then the resolution of things was just so well done. Mary Braddon writes really, really well, and it wasn't ever boring. I loved that the detective was driven by emotions rather than it being a job assigned to him, because it just made the whole case more intimate, and the villain was just like, wow, this villain went above and beyond to get what they wanted, and I was all for that because I love a good villain. And for M, I read Measure for Measure by Shakespeare, and that also fit the prompt of Gaia for the Mythathon, which is to read a book published at least 5 years ago. I mean, it's Shakespeare, it was published ages ago, so it fit the prompt perfectly. Measure for Measure is about this girl called Isabel, sorry. I believe her name is Isabel or something like that, and her brother has been imprisoned very harshly for something that was a crime, but he was trying to resolve it, so it wasn't really a crime. He got someone pregnant without marrying her, and he was just about to go and marry her, and then they're like, okay, go into prison now. So he was getting the death penalty for this, which is really harsh because he was about to marry her anyway. But yeah, and then this very corrupt official says, I will free your brother if you'll have sex with me, and she's like, it's very corrupt. So basically this play is really talking about corrupt people in power, the law, what's right or wrong, is there grey area in the law, is there room for movement, is there room for justice to really be done. And it was just a very interesting read, very thought-provoking. I loved the themes it discussed, I loved how Isabel handled everything thrown her way. I didn't really care about what the secondary characters were jabbering on about in their scenes, and the Duke jabbered on a little bit too much, but other than that I really did enjoy this play and all the things that it went into. For the N prompt, I read None of the Above by, oh gosh, I'm gonna forget it, but the cover will be up here, and it fit for the Achilles and Patriarchus prompt, which is to read an LGBT plus book. And None of the Above is about a girl who finds out that she is intersex. Here we go. This is what Google is saying intersex is. Intersex is a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. And in the case of this book in particular, the girl is born with a vagina outwardly, but she also has testes, and she just discovers this when she tries to sleep with her boyfriend for the first time. And this book is mostly about her trying to come to terms with her diagnosis and trying to figure out her gender identity and also her own like self-identity as well. She's really struggling with balancing everything. She also is a runner, and you know, there comes into question if she can run on the female team, and people at school start bullying her. It's basically that kind of story. It's a contemporary young adult novel, and I did really enjoy it, and I was so intrigued because I was learning so much. The ending was a bit too happily ever after, and it came tied together too quickly. And I did read this very negative review that really raised a couple of important points. I'm going to try and find it on Goodreads again and link it down below, because I'm not the authority to speak on this subject, and I just thought if you're going to think about reading this one, you might want to read that review as well. But I did enjoy the book. I gave it 4 stars, I believe. Lastly, the last one I'm going to talk about in this video is for O, and that was Othello by Shakespeare, and it also fit the prompt Poseidon, which is to read a book which features the sea. And I was pushing it a little bit, this one, but in Othello they do spend quite a bit of time on ships which are on the sea, and there's this whole fight going out on the sea between these fleets, so you know it counts, okay? And Othello was another 5-star read. I literally had so many this month, and it's about this black, like, guys, this is Shakespeare's time. The hero is black, and he is this great, like, war fighter, general, whatever, but the person who works under him is, you know, major jealous, and they're racist, and they're like, I don't want to work under this black person who is newly married and very happy and like winning wars and all that stuff. So he decides to manipulate him to make him think that his wife is cheating on him, which leads to things. It escalates, and it was just so interesting. I really liked the female characters and their choices they made. I'm not going to say they're the pinnacle of feminism, but they were driven by what they believed is right, and I always liked that. I loved Othello. I mean, he gets manipulated to like the moon and back, and he's not a perfect character, but I did like his character. And it also said a lot, because in the beginning he was a slave, he was called Moor, he was nameless, and then when he was useful to the war and he was winning all these wars, suddenly he was Othello, he was a general, he had a title, but then after things go down he's been reduced back to being called slave and Moor again. And I just think it shows how when you are a minority and you're useful, you know, you're not going to hear those slurs, you're going to be like praised and everything, but the minute you're not useful to the non-minority's needs, you're reduced back to your minority character and just put right down. So it's just very interesting themes, really well done, and I'm just like proud of my Shakespeare for taking the risk and making a black character the hero in one of his plays in that time. Okay guys, that's it for part 1. We've been through a lot of books. I hope you come back for part 2. I'll put it up soon. Please let me know in the comment section down below what your favourite read in the month of November was. And yes, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!